Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome back for another card video. I've got a cute sea life card for you using the Best Fishes set by Simon Says Stamp. It's one of my favorites of all time. I've got the Scripty Saying set by Lawn Fawn, and I have this new underwater collage by Memory Box die that I just got because I do a lot of underwater things and I thought this would be a fun die to have. I'm stamping my sentiment with some VersaFine black onyx ink onto some Canson XL mixed media paper. I'm going to clear emboss this just because it's easier to watercolor that way. I'm going to center my die on a piece of A2 Fog cardstock by Simon Says Stamp. We'll run that through the Big Shot. And now I'm going to put my watercolor paper in the MISTI and kind of position where my sentiment's going to be inside my die and figure out where the fish needs to be. And then I'll just take the fog piece off and I'm going to stamp my fish in Memento Tuxedo black ink because it works best with Copic markers. I'm going to color this fish pretty simply. I'm going to do the whole back portion of the fish with the YR09, just a solid color. And then I'm going to take this YR00 and I'm just going to put dots all over this. And it's going to push the color away from my pen and add some of that lighter peachy color. So it's going to look like it's a little bit more textured when I do this. And then my next step is going to be to take that YR09, again, the first color I used, and add dots with that. So I have the original color and then I have lighter dots and then darker dots. So it makes it a really nice kind of tone on tone, I guess you could say, color scheme for this fish. Now I'm going to color his fins solid Y17 and the front. And then I'm going to take the same YR09 and I'm just going to use the very tip of my marker to add some dots. And I'm going to make it kind of a heavier dot close to the body, and then I'm going to spread out the dots a little bit more as I go outward. And I'm also going to make the dots a little bit smaller as I go outward, just to make this fish a little bit more interesting. I did not take my fish stamp out of the MISTI because I knew I was going to stamp it again. So I'm going to stamp it with Versamark ink this time, and then I will clear emboss it. And that way it's easier to watercolor around. I'm going to use my Gansai Tambi watercolors. I'm going to be using number 50 and number 62, so kind of a bluish green and just a plain old blue. And I'm going to watercolor with a big brush and a little brush, and they're both round brushes, but they have very, very sharp tips, like fine tips. And I'm going to cover my cardstock with water first. And you can see in a minute here that I'm not planning to watercolor above the swirl, the Scripty Saying, but if I don't put water on it, then I found that it sort of warps the bottom and not the top, and it becomes uneven. So that's why I'm going to wet the whole cardstock. So I really sped this up, and I'm really just adding some blue here, some greenish blue there, and I'm using my fine tip paintbrush whenever I get close to the edges of the sentiment and my fish. Now I could have masked the fish with maybe some masking fluid or some Molotow, I think that's what it's called, the masking pen, but I didn't want to deal with that because sometimes it rips at the paper, and so I thought I'll just color around it. And so I put a bunch of color on, and then I used my heat tool to kind of quickly dry it, and then I saw that I had some water stains, which I really didn't want, so I just added more water and a little bit more color. And then I sort of moved the color right and left so that it looked like it was kind of flowing a little bit with waves, and so you can see how the color sort of goes back and forth a little bit. And then I dried it, and I decided I was just going to leave it right there. I'm going to take these two sort of plant life stamps from the set, and I'm going to stamp them with fog ink onto this fog cardstock, so it's a tone on tone. And I'm just rotating back and forth. I do like 2 and then 1 and then 1 and then 2, and I'm just mixing it up, and I'm covering the bottom just to add a little bit of detail to this top panel. Tone on tone is a great way to add something without distracting. All right, so now I'm going to place that piece on my watercolor panel and mark it so I know how to trim it, because I don't want it to show behind that fog cardstock. And I noticed it was still a little bit damp, and it's the perfect time to put an acrylic block and let it sit for a little bit. And it really helped the warping, so it flattened out my cardstock. And now I can move on to stamping this, I guess it's kelp. And so I'm going to take my fog panel and sort of eyeball where I need to put this. There are 3 of these kelp stamps that come with the set, but I'm just going to use, I think this is the medium size one, and I'm just going to flip it up and down so that it looks like I'm using a different stamp. It's not the same one every time. So I'm just sort of figuring out, I think overall I probably should have made them a little bit higher, but I just tried to make it a little bit random. I'm also going to add a couple of small silhouette fish, just in black ink, one on the left that's moving to the right and one on the right that's moving to the left. And this one is a little bit smaller, so they're two different sizes. I want my fog piece to pop up, so I'm going to cover the whole thing with Scotch foam tape. And then I'm going to place this over my watercolor panel. Now, when I started to do this, I thought it is a little bit warped and I don't want to put it on a piece of warped paper. So I started to think about this and I'm like, how can I get this completely flat before I put the fog on there? So what I decided to do was to take my watercolor panel and cover the whole thing with ATG tape runner, like thoroughly cover it. And then I thought I'm going to put it on my craft mat because it'll just pop off my craft mat. It's not going to stick because it's kind of a non-stick mat. So I just very carefully and lightly placed it so that it would be completely flat. And then I took my fog piece and I hovered it on top until I got it where I want it, and I lightly tapped it in. And then I could not get it. I mean, this ATG tape runner was just super strong. And when I got it off, it moved the paper and it messed everything up, but I was able to kind of release it. And then I did the same exact thing. So I'm now pushing down even harder. I'm so focused on trying to get everything, the two pieces together. And then it really was sticking to my craft mat. And at this point, I'm really questioning why I'm doing this at all. And my craft mat is starting to crease a little bit because you really can't fold it at all. And so it's really, really sticking. I'm showing you my big struggle here. And it just seems like it's taking forever to get this thing off, but finally it does come off. And surprisingly enough, everything was intact and looked good. I adhered this to a card base, just a Neenah Solar White folded piece of cardstock, and everything was just fine. So I wouldn't recommend doing that. I would go ahead and put the fog piece on top and then put the ATG tape runner on your watercolor panel. Anyway, so that is the card for today. I hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.